The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his scarlet tunic for the 100th time. 23 years he had served in the Queen's Guard, and never once had his uniform been anything less than perfect. His black boots gleamed like mirrors, his bearskin hat sat at precisely the correct angle, and his rifle was positioned exactly as regulations demanded. James had joined the Guard as a young man of 19, fresh from military training and bursting with pride at being selected for such an honor. His father had been a guardsman before him, and his grandfather before that. The Mitchell family had protected the royal family for 3 generations, and James carried that legacy with the weight of tradition on his shoulders. Standing at attention outside the Queen's private quarters, James reflected on how much had changed during his service. He had witnessed 3 different monarchs, countless state visits, and ceremonies that made headlines around the world. Through it all, he had maintained the same unwavering discipline that had made the Queen's Guard legendary. The castle was unusually quiet this morning. Most of the staff were preparing for the afternoon's charity event, where Queen Camilla would be presenting awards to local heroes. James had been specially assigned to this post because of his exemplary record. His commanding officer had praised his dedication, noting that in over 2 decades of service, James had never once broken protocol or stepped out of line. As he stood motionless, James thought about his daughter Sarah, who was now studying medicine at university. She often teased him about his rigid adherence to rules, calling him the most disciplined man in England. His wife Emma understood better. She knew that his commitment to duty wasn't just about following orders, it was about honor, tradition, and protecting something greater than himself. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. James recognized the distinctive click of expensive heels on marble flooring. Queen Camilla was approaching, accompanied by her lady-in-waiting and 2 other members of staff. James stiffened even further if such a thing were possible, his eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. Queen Camilla paused directly in front of him. This was unusual. Typically, the royals would acknowledge the guards with a brief nod before continuing on their way. James could see her in his peripheral vision, an elegant figure in a navy blue dress suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. She seemed to be studying him intently. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said softly, her voice carrying the refined accent that the world recognized immediately. "I understand you've been with us for quite some time." James remained at attention, not permitted to respond unless directly asked a question that required an answer. The Queen's unexpected attention made his heart race slightly, though his exterior remained completely calm. 23 years, I'm told," Queen Camilla continued, stepping closer. "Your commanding officer speaks very highly of your service. He tells me you've never missed a single day of duty, never received a single reprimand, and that your dedication is an inspiration to the younger guards." The lady-in-waiting shifted uncomfortably behind the Queen, clearly uncertain about this departure from the usual routine. The other staff members exchanged glances, sensing that something significant was happening but unsure what it might be. James felt a strange mixture of pride and confusion. In all his years of service, he had rarely been addressed directly by members of the royal family. His role was to be invisible, a silent protector who blended into the background of royal life. This personal attention was both an honor and a source of anxiety. "Your father served before you, didn't he?" Queen Camilla asked, her tone becoming more conversational. "And your grandfather as well. 3 generations of Mitchells protecting the crown." A slight breeze stirred through the corridor, causing the heavy curtains to flutter gently. James could smell the faint scent of the Queen's perfume, a subtle floral fragrance that somehow made this surreal moment feel more real. His mind raced with questions about why this conversation was happening and where it might lead. Queen Camilla took another step closer, close enough that James could see the intricate details of her jewelry, a simple but elegant pearl necklace and matching earrings. Her eyes, a warm blue-gray, seemed to be searching for something in his stoic expression. "I've been thinking lately about service," she said, her voice taking on a more personal tone, "about what it means to dedicate one's life to something larger than oneself. You and I, Sergeant Mitchell, we both understand that calling, don't we?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. James felt the weight of 23 years of training pulling him to maintain his silence. But something in the Queen's manner suggested this was more than casual conversation. The lady-in-waiting cleared her throat softly. a gentle reminder about the schedule they needed to maintain. Queen Camilla glanced at her watch, then back at James. I have a ceremony to attend shortly, but I wanted to take this moment to acknowledge your service personally, not as queen to subject, but as one person to another who understands duty. James felt his throat tighten slightly. This was unlike anything he had experienced in his military career. The personal nature of the Queen's words, the way she spoke of shared understanding, created an emotional resonance that caught him off guard. Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed, Queen Camilla continued. But I wonder, Sergeant Mitchell, when was the last time someone thanked you properly for your sacrifice? When did someone acknowledge not just your service, but the man behind the uniform? The corridor fell completely silent except for the distant sounds of castle life continuing elsewhere. James felt as though time had stopped, as though this moment existed outside the normal flow of royal protocol and military precision. Something was building toward a moment that would change everything, though he couldn't yet imagine what form that change might take. The silence stretched between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. James felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to waver under the intensity of Queen Camilla's gaze. Her words about acknowledgement and sacrifice had touched something deep within him that he had buried beneath years of military discipline. I can see in your eyes that you're surprised by this conversation, Queen Camilla said gently. Perhaps even uncomfortable. That's understandable. This isn't how these interactions usually go, is it? The lady-in-waiting took a small step forward, clearly concerned about the deviation from protocol. Your Majesty, the ceremony... Queen Camilla raised her hand slightly, a gesture both graceful and commanding. The ceremony can wait a few more minutes, Margaret. This is important. James felt sweat beginning to form beneath his heavy bearskin hat, though whether from the weight of the headgear or the emotional weight of the moment, he couldn't be sure. His training screamed at him to maintain position, to remain the perfect statue that 23 years of service had molded him into. You know, Sergeant Mitchell, the Queen continued, I've been reading about your family's history with the Guard. Your grandfather, William Mitchell, served during some of the most challenging times in our nation's history. The war years, when protecting the royal family meant facing very real dangers. James's heart clenched at the mention of his grandfather. William Mitchell had been his hero, a man who had instilled in young James the values of duty, honor, and selfless service. His grandfather had rarely spoken about his wartime service, but the few stories he had shared painted a picture of extraordinary dedication under impossible circumstances. Your father continued that tradition, Queen Camilla went on. 31 years of faithful service. I remember him, actually. A kind man with a gentle smile who once helped my late mother-in-law when she had stumbled on these very steps. The memory brought tears to James's eyes that he fought desperately to contain. His father had passed away just 2 years ago, proud until the end of his son's continued service to the crown. James had held his father's hand in the hospital and promised to uphold the family tradition, never imagining that one day he would be standing here receiving personal recognition from the Queen herself. And now you, Queen Camilla said, her voice growing softer. 23 years of perfect service. No breaks, no complaints, no requests for special treatment. You've stood guard in blazing heat and bitter cold, through illness and personal loss, through moments of joy and periods of grief. James remembered the morning he had received the call about his father's heart attack. He had been on duty standing guard during a state visit and had requested permission to leave. His commanding officer had reluctantly agreed, but James had insisted on finishing his shift first. Duty before personal needs. It was the Mitchell way. I know about the day your father died, Queen Camilla said quietly, and James felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. I know you completed your 8-hour watch before going to the hospital. I know you were back on duty the day after the funeral. The tears James had been fighting threatened to overwhelm him. How could she know these details? How could she understand the internal struggle he had faced, torn between his duty to the crown and his love for his family? I also know about your daughter's graduation, the Queen continued. The one you missed because you volunteered to cover for a colleague whose own child was ill. Sarah understood, didn't she? Because she's been raised by a man who puts others before himself. James felt his composure finally beginning to crack. The mention of Sarah's graduation brought back the profound sadness he had felt at missing such an important moment in his daughter's life. She had been understanding, even proud of his sacrifice, but he had seen the disappointment in her eyes during their video call afterward. "Your wife Emma," Queen Camilla said. "She supported you through all of this. The long hours, the missed family events, the constant worry about your safety during public events. She's been the strength behind your strength, hasn't she?" The accuracy of the Queen's observations left James feeling exposed and vulnerable. Emma had indeed been his rock, supporting his career even when it meant sacrifice for their entire family. She had never complained about the missed dinners, the holidays spent on duty, or the constant state of readiness that military life demanded. "I've learned something important during my years in royal service," Queen Camilla said, stepping even closer. "Duty is noble, but the person performing that duty is human. You've given us everything, Sergeant Mitchell, but when did we last give something back to you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything James had been taught about service and sacrifice. He had been raised to believe that service was its own reward, that personal recognition was unnecessary and even unwelcome. But standing here, listening to Queen Camilla acknowledge not just his service but his humanity, James felt a profound shift occurring within him. "I want to do something for you today," the Queen said, her voice filled with warmth and determination, something that protocol doesn't normally allow, something that recognizes not just your service to the crown, but your sacrifice as a human being. James felt his breathing become shallow. Whatever Queen Camilla was planning, he sensed it would challenge everything he had been taught about proper protocol and military bearing. The lady-in-waiting looked increasingly nervous, checking her watch and glancing toward the corridor where the ceremony preparations were undoubtedly continuing. "Your Majesty," Margaret ventured again. "Perhaps we should—" "Margaret," Queen Camilla said firmly. "Some things are more important than schedules." Queen Camilla turned her attention back to James, her expression both determined and compassionate. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast a golden glow around them, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere in the ancient corridor. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying the authority of the crown but softened with genuine emotion, "I want you to kneel." The words hit James like a physical blow. In all his years of service, in all the protocol manuals he had memorized, in all the traditions passed down through 3 generations of his family, there was no provision for this. Guards did not kneel before royalty unless they were being knighted, and that ceremony required specific preparation, formal documentation, and the presence of multiple witnesses. James felt his world tilting on its axis. His training demanded that he remain at attention, that he maintain his post regardless of any commands that fell outside established protocol. But the sincerity in Queen Camilla's voice, the personal nature of their conversation, and the emotional weight of the moment created a conflict unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Your Majesty," Margaret whispered urgently. "This isn't—" "Margaret, please," Queen Camilla interrupted gently but firmly. "Sometimes the heart must overrule the handbook." James felt his legs trembling slightly beneath him. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain position, to politely explain that such an action would violate protocols that had been established over centuries. But something deeper, something that transcended military training and royal tradition, was stirring within him. "I know this isn't conventional," Queen Camilla said, seeming to read his internal struggle. "I know it goes against everything you've been taught. But sometimes, Sergeant Mitchell, the most meaningful moments happen when we set aside convention in favor of truth." The other staff members had grown completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The castle around them seemed to hold its breath, as if the very stones understood the significance of this moment. James thought about his grandfather, who had spoken occasionally about moments during the war when normal rules had to be suspended in favor of human decency. He remembered his father's words about the difference between blind obedience and thoughtful service. Most of all, he thought about the man he wanted to be when he looked back on this moment years from now. "This isn't about ceremony or tradition," Queen Camilla continued, her voice growing more passionate. "This is about acknowledging a debt that can never truly be repaid. You've given us your youth, your strength, your unwavering dedication. You've stood guard while your family needed you. You've protected us while sacrificing your own comfort and convenience." James felt tears beginning to well up in his eyes despite his efforts to maintain composure. The Queen's words were breaking through defenses he had built over decades of service, touching wounds he hadn't even realized he carried. "I've watched you, Sergeant Mitchell," she said. I've seen you stand motionless for hours in the pouring rain. I've seen you maintain perfect posture while dealing with personal grief. I've seen you treat every day of service as if it were your first, with the same enthusiasm and dedication that brought you here 23 years ago. The mention of his consistency over the years brought back a flood of memories. James remembered the day he had stood guard while suffering from a severe flu, determined not to let his unit down. He recalled the Christmas morning he had spent on duty, watching through palace windows as families gathered for celebrations he couldn't attend. "But what I want to acknowledge today," Queen Camilla said, stepping closer still, "is not just your service to the crown, but your service to the ideals that make the crown worthy of protection. You've represented the very best of what it means to serve others." James felt his resolve wavering like a flag in strong wind. The emotional weight of the Queen's recognition, combined with the unprecedented nature of her request, was creating a perfect storm of confusion and profound feeling. "When I ask you to kneel," Queen Camilla said softly, "I'm not asking you to break protocol. I'm asking you to accept something. The protocol has no language for genuine gratitude from someone who understands the true cost of your sacrifice." The lady-in-waiting looked as if she might faint from anxiety. This conversation was lasting far longer than any royal interaction should, and the request itself was so far outside normal procedures that she had no framework for handling it. "I know this is difficult," the Queen acknowledged, her eyes never leaving James's face. "I know every fiber of your training is telling you to maintain position, but I'm asking you to trust me, Sergeant Mitchell. Trust that sometimes the most respectful thing we can do is to set aside the rules that separate us and acknowledge our shared humanity." James felt his breathing become labored. The weight of decision pressed down on him like his heavy ceremonial uniform. He thought about his daughter Sarah, who would want him to follow his heart. He thought about his wife Emma, who had always encouraged him to see beyond rigid rules to the human truth underneath. "This moment," Queen Camilla said, "will be between us. Not for cameras, not for ceremonies, not for history books. Just one human being acknowledging another's sacrifice and asking for the privilege of expressing proper gratitude." The word privilege struck James deeply. That the Queen would consider it a privilege to thank him personally challenged everything he understood about hierarchy and royal protocol. In her words, he heard something he had never expected: humility from someone who occupied the highest position in the realm. James felt his carefully maintained military bearing beginning to soften as he realized he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just this moment, but how he would remember his entire career of service. The moment stretched between them like a bridge spanning two different worlds, one of rigid protocol and ancient tradition, the other of human connection and heartfelt recognition. James felt his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his rifle, the weapon that had been his constant companion through countless hours of service. "Sergeant Mitchell," Queen Camilla said gently, "I can see the struggle in your eyes. I understand that what I'm asking challenges everything you've been taught. But sometimes the greatest act of service is knowing when to trust the person you're serving." Those words penetrated James's consciousness like nothing else could have. Trust. After 23 years of faithful service, Queen Camilla was asking him to trust her judgment, to trust that this unprecedented moment was not a violation of his duty, but a fulfillment of it. James thought about the oath he had taken all those years ago, promising to serve and protect the royal family with his life if necessary. But as he looked into Queen Camilla's eyes, he realized that true service might sometimes mean accepting acknowledgement rather than deflecting it, receiving gratitude rather than dismissing it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, James began to bend his right knee. The movement felt foreign after decades of standing at rigid attention, and yet it also felt like the most natural thing in the world. His left knee followed, and suddenly he was kneeling on the ancient marble floor of Windsor Castle. The lady-in-waiting gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. The other staff members stood frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a breach of protocol or something far more significant. But Queen Camilla's face broke into a radiant smile, her eyes filling with tears of her own. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words carried more weight than any royal proclamation James had ever heard. Kneeling there on the cold marble, James felt a profound shift occurring within him. The rigid walls he had built around his emotions during decades of service began crumbling, and he found himself experiencing feelings he had suppressed for years. The grief over missed family moments, the pride in his service, the love for his family who had supported him, and the deep satisfaction of a life dedicated to something greater than himself. All of it flooded through him at once. Queen Camilla reached into her small handbag and withdrew something that made James's breath catch in his throat. It was a simple white handkerchief, but embroidered on it in gold thread was the royal cipher. She extended it toward him with both hands. "This belonged to the late Queen Elizabeth," she said softly. "She carried it during some of the most significant moments of her reign. I want you to have it, not as a formal honor, but as a token of personal gratitude from someone who understands what it means to dedicate your life to service." James's hands shook as he accepted the handkerchief. The fabric was soft with age, and he could imagine the late queen carrying it during countless ceremonies and state occasions. To receive something so personal, so connected to the very heart of the monarchy he had served, was overwhelming. "Your Majesty," he managed to say, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Queen Camilla replied gently. "Just know that your service has been seen, your sacrifice has been acknowledged, and your dedication has touched hearts in ways you never imagined." Margaret, the lady-in-waiting, had tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched this unprecedented exchange. Even she, with all her experience in royal protocol, recognized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. A moment when the formal barriers between monarch and subject dissolved in favor of genuine human connection. "I want you to think about something, Sergeant Mitchell," Queen Camilla said, her voice growing stronger and more resolute. "When you go home tonight to Emma, when you call Sarah at university, when you remember your father and grandfather, I want you to know that their sacrifices and yours have created something beautiful. You've been part of preserving traditions that connect us to our history while protecting values that guide us toward our future." James felt the truth of her words settling into his heart like seeds taking root. For so many years he had focused on the daily requirements of his duty, without fully understanding the larger meaning of his service. But kneeling here, receiving the Queen's personal gratitude, he began to see his role in a broader context. "Every day that you've stood guard," Queen Camilla continued, "you've been part of something ancient and honorable. But more than that, you've embodied the very qualities, loyalty, selflessness, dedication, that make our society worth protecting." The handkerchief in James's hand seemed to pulse with the weight of history and tradition. He thought about all the guardsmen who had come before him, all who had stood where he now knelt, all who had made the same commitment to service that had defined his adult life. "Rise, Sergeant Mitchell," Queen Camilla said gently. "Rise as a man who has given his best years in service to others, and who has received the gratitude he has always deserved but rarely heard." As James slowly stood, his legs unsteady after kneeling on the hard marble, he felt fundamentally changed. The protocol had been broken, but something far more valuable had been created in its place, a moment of pure recognition between two people who understood the true meaning of service. Queen Camilla reached out and briefly touched his arm, a gesture of warmth that transcended all royal formality. "Thank you, James," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Thank you for everything." As James rose to his feet, the world around him seemed different somehow, as if the very air in the corridor had been transformed by what had just occurred. The handkerchief in his hand felt warm, and he carefully tucked it into his uniform pocket close to his heart. Queen Camilla watched him with the expression of deep satisfaction, as if she had just completed something she had been planning for a very long time. "Your Majesty," Margaret ventured cautiously, "the ceremony really must begin soon. The guests are arriving and the media—" "Of course," Queen Camilla replied, though her attention remained focused on James. "But before we go, I want to ensure that Sergeant Mitchell understands something important." James straightened his uniform reflexively. Though his movements lacked the mechanical precision they had possessed just minutes earlier, something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of his role, his service, and himself. "What happened here today," Queen Camilla said clearly, "was not a violation of protocol. It was an evolution of it. Protocol exists to serve us, not the other way around. And sometimes the most important service we can provide is to recognize the humanity in those who serve alongside us." The other staff members exchanged glances, clearly struggling to process what they had witnessed. This was not the kind of royal interaction they had been trained to expect or handle. Yet something in Queen Camilla's manner suggested that this moment was not aberrant but necessary. "James," she continued, using his first name again with deliberate intention, "I want you to know that word of this moment will not leave this corridor unless you choose to share it. This was personal between us, and it will remain so." James felt a profound sense of relief at her words. He had been beginning to worry about the consequences of what had just occurred, wondering if his commanding officers would view his actions as a breach of military discipline. But Queen Camilla's assurance that their exchange would remain private removed that concern. "However," she added, her tone becoming more formal, "I do want to discuss your future with your commanding officer. 23 years of perfect service deserves recognition beyond a private moment in a corridor." James's eyes widened in surprise. The idea that this personal interaction might lead to official recognition had not occurred to him. Throughout his career, he had expected nothing beyond the satisfaction of duty well performed. "But, Your Majesty," he said hesitantly, "I've never sought—" "I know you haven't," Queen Camilla interrupted gently. "That's precisely why you deserve it. The people who seek recognition rarely deserve it as much as those who serve quietly and faithfully, without expecting anything in return." Margaret checked her watch again, the subtle gesture reminding everyone of the approaching ceremony. Queen Camilla nodded in acknowledgement but showed no signs of rushing this conversation to a premature conclusion. "I want to share something with you, James," she said, her voice taking on a more intimate tone. "When I married into this family, I struggled with understanding the true nature of service. I thought it was about following rules and maintaining appearances. But over the years, I've learned that real service is about connection, about understanding that every person who supports this institution has their own story, their own sacrifices, their own dreams." James listened intently, honored to receive such personal insight from someone whose own journey into royal service had been scrutinized by the world. "You've taught me something today," Queen Camilla continued. "You've shown me that sometimes the most meaningful way to honor someone's service is to step outside the comfortable boundaries of tradition and speak from the heart." The admission that he had taught the Queen something left James feeling dizzy with disbelief. The idea that his simple presence and service could provide insight to someone of her stature was almost incomprehensible. "Your family," Queen Camilla said, "your wife Emma and your daughter Sarah, they should know about this moment. Not the details perhaps, but the spirit of it. They should know that your service has been truly seen and deeply appreciated." James thought about going home that evening, about trying to explain to Emma why he seemed different, why something fundamental had changed in his understanding of his career. How could he possibly convey the emotional impact of this extraordinary interaction? "I've been thinking about legacy lately," Queen Camilla said, her gaze drifting toward the windows where the afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows. "About what we leave behind when our time of service ends. Your legacy, James, isn't just 23 years of perfect duty. It's the example you've set for every guardsman who has served alongside you." The weight of that observation settled on James's shoulders like a new kind of responsibility. He had never thought of himself as setting an example, had never considered that his quiet dedication might influence others. "Your commanding officer tells me that the younger guards look up to you," Queen Camilla revealed. "They see your consistency, your professionalism, your quiet dignity, and they understand what it means to serve with honor." James felt a flush of pride mixed with humility. The idea that his service had inspired others was both gratifying and sobering. It meant that his work had ripple effects he had never considered. "That's why what happened here today matters," Queen Camilla explained. "Not just for you, but for everyone who will serve after you. They need to know that their dedication is seen, their sacrifices are valued, and their humanity is respected." Margaret cleared her throat softly, and Queen Camilla finally acknowledged the time constraints they were facing. But her expression suggested that she had accomplished exactly what she had set out to do in this corridor. "The ceremony awaits," she said with a slight smile, "but this conversation will stay with me long after the formal events are forgotten." As Queen Camilla prepared to leave, James felt an overwhelming urge to express his gratitude, but words seemed inadequate for what he was feeling. The handkerchief in his pocket felt like a talisman, a physical reminder that this extraordinary moment had actually occurred. Queen Camilla began to move toward the corridor that would lead her to the ceremony, but she paused after just a few steps and turned back to face James one final time. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows created a halo effect around her figure, and for a moment, she looked less like a queen and more like someone's caring grandmother. "James," she said, her voice carrying a note of urgency, "there's one more thing I need you to understand. What happened here today. Your willingness to trust me, to set aside protocol in favor of human connection. That took tremendous courage." James felt his throat tighten at her words. Courage was not how he would have described his actions. If anything, he felt as though he had been weak, allowing emotion to override his training. "I can see in your expression that you don't think of it that way," Queen Camilla observed with a knowing smile. "You probably think you showed weakness by kneeling, by accepting my gratitude, by letting me see your humanity. But you're wrong." Margaret and the other staff members stood quietly nearby, clearly moved by what they were witnessing but uncertain about their role in this unprecedented moment. "The easiest thing would have been to maintain your rigid posture, to deflect my words with military correctness, to keep the barriers in place that separate royalty from those who serve," Queen Camilla explained. "But you chose the harder path. You chose to trust, to be vulnerable, to accept recognition you've never felt you deserved." James realized she was right. Throughout his career, he had found it far easier to maintain emotional distance, to hide behind the safety of protocol and regulation. Opening himself to personal connection with the very person he was sworn to protect had indeed required a different kind of bravery. "That courage," Queen Camilla continued, "is exactly what makes you the kind of person worth protecting. You embody the values that make our society meaningful: humility, dedication, loyalty, and the strength to remain human even in roles that might encourage us to become something less." The words struck James like a revelation. He had spent so many years focusing on being the perfect guard that he had almost forgotten the importance of remaining a complete person. Queen Camilla's recognition reminded him that his humanity was not something to be suppressed, but something to be honored. "When you go home tonight," she said, "I want you to tell Emma what happened here. Not because it's required, but because she deserves to know that her husband's service has been truly seen. She sacrificed alongside you all these years, and she should share in this moment of recognition." The mention of his wife brought tears to James's eyes again. Emma had indeed sacrificed greatly for his career, supporting his dedication even when it meant less time together, missed celebrations, and constant worry about his safety during public events. "And Sarah," Queen Camilla added with warmth, "your daughter should know that her father's example has inspired a queen, that the values he's demonstrated through his service are qualities that will serve her well in whatever career she chooses." James thought about his daughter, studying medicine with the same dedication he had brought to his military service. Perhaps his example had influenced her choice to pursue a career dedicated to helping others. "Your family has served alongside you," Queen Camilla said. "They've made sacrifices they never signed up for, supported decisions that sometimes put duty before family time, and maintained their love and pride in you, even when your job demanded everything you had to give." The truth of her observation was overwhelming. James had always focused on his own service and sacrifice, but Queen Camilla was helping him see the broader picture, the entire family that had supported his dedication to duty. "I'm going to ask you to do something else that might feel uncomfortable," Queen Camilla said, her tone becoming more serious. "I want you to start accepting the gratitude you receive from the public. When visitors to the castle thank you for your service, don't just nod and look away. Let them see that you appreciate their acknowledgement." This request struck James as almost as challenging as kneeling had been. His training had taught him to remain aloof from public interaction, to be a silent, stoic presence rather than a person who engaged with the crowds. "The public respects the guard because they see you as symbols of dedication and honor," Queen Camilla explained. "But they also need to see that you're human beings worthy of respect in return. Your willingness to accept their gratitude graciously will strengthen, not weaken, the connection between the monarchy and the people." James nodded slowly, beginning to understand that Queen Camilla was asking him to evolve his understanding of service itself. She wanted him to see that true service included allowing others to express their appreciation, That connection could coexist with professionalism. The ceremony I'm about to attend, Queen Camilla said, is designed to recognize local heroes, people who have served their communities with distinction. As I present those awards, I'll be thinking about you, James, and about all the unsung heroes who serve quietly and faithfully without expecting recognition. The parallel she was drawing between his service and that of the community heroes she was about to honor filled James with a sense of belonging to something larger than military protocol or royal tradition. Your service matters, Queen Camilla said with finality. Your sacrifice has meaning, your example inspires others, and your humanity makes all of it worthwhile. As she prepared to leave for the final time, Queen Camilla extended her hand toward James, not for him to bow over or kiss, but for a simple, human handshake between equals who understood the true meaning of service. James reached out and grasped her hand, feeling the warmth and strength of her grip. In that simple contact, he felt the completion of a circle that had begun 23 years earlier when he first took his oath of service. 3 months had passed since that extraordinary morning in the corridor of Windsor Castle, and James Mitchell's life had been quietly but fundamentally transformed. As he stood at his post on this crisp autumn day, watching tourists and visitors move through the castle grounds, he found himself experiencing his duties through completely new eyes. The handkerchief from Queen Elizabeth remained safely tucked in a frame on his bedroom dresser at home, a daily reminder of the moment when protocol had given way to human connection. Emma had cried when he told her about Queen Camilla's words, finally understanding that the sacrifices their family had made for his career had been truly seen and appreciated by the very people they had served. Sarah had been incredulous when he called her at university that evening, hardly able to believe that her father, the man she had always seen as unshakably modest, had received such personal recognition from the Queen herself. "Dad," she had said through tears of pride, "you've always been my hero, but now I understand why you're everyone else's hero too." True to her word, Queen Camilla had spoken with James's commanding officer the following week. The conversation had led to James being selected for a special commendation that would be presented at the annual guard ceremony in the spring. More importantly, he had been asked to help develop a new program to support the families of guardsmen, acknowledging that service extended beyond the individual to encompass entire families who made sacrifices for duty. Standing at his post now, James noticed a young family approaching. The father was pointing out the various uniforms and explaining the role of the Queen's Guard to his wide-eyed son, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The boy broke away from his parents and approached James with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. "Are you a real soldier?" the boy asked, looking up at James with admiration. Before the encounter with Queen Camilla, James would have remained silent, staring straight ahead as protocol demanded. But now, remembering her words about accepting gratitude and allowing people to see his humanity, he looked down at the child and allowed a slight smile to cross his face. "Yes, I am," he said softly. "I protect the Queen in this castle." The boy's face lit up with excitement. "That's the most important job in the world." "It's one of them," James replied, thinking about doctors like his daughter, teachers, firefighters, and all the other people who dedicated their lives to serving others. "But there are many important jobs that help make the world a better place." The boy's parents approached, looking apologetic for their son's boldness. "I'm sorry," the mother said. "We told him not to bother you." "He's not bothering me at all," James assured them, surprising himself with how natural this interaction felt. Questions show curiosity, and curiosity is how we learn about the world. The father extended his hand. "Thank you for your service," he said simply. "My grandfather served in the army, and I know what it means to dedicate your life to protecting others." Instead of deflecting the gratitude as he had done countless times before, James accepted the handshake warmly. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." As the family moved on, James felt a warmth spreading through his chest. Queen Camilla had been right. Accepting gratitude graciously didn't diminish his professionalism or compromise his duties. Instead, it created connections that reminded him why his service mattered. Later that afternoon, as his shift was ending, James received word that he was wanted in the administrative offices. His heart raced slightly, wondering if somehow his new approach to public interaction had been seen as inappropriate. But when he arrived, he found his commanding officer smiling broadly. "Mitchell," the officer said, "I've just received a letter from a family who visited yesterday. They wanted to specifically commend the guardsman who took time to speak with their young son and made him feel welcome at the castle. They said it was the highlight of their visit to England." James felt a flush of pride mixed with relief. "Sir, I hope You didn't do anything wrong, Mitchell," his commander interrupted. "In fact, you did something very right. That family will remember their interaction with you for the rest of their lives. You've shown them that the Queen's Guard are not just symbols, but real people worthy of respect and admiration." Walking home that evening, James reflected on how profoundly his understanding of service had evolved. He still maintained the same high standards of discipline and professionalism that had defined his career, but now he understood that true service included allowing others to connect with him as a human being. Emma was waiting for him at the kitchen table, a cup of tea already prepared and steaming beside his usual chair. "How was your day?" she asked, as she had every day for 23 years. "Different," James replied, settling into his chair and reaching for her hand. "Better." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Tell me about it." As James recounted the interactions with the young family and the commendation from his commanding officer, he saw pride and joy shining in Emma's eyes. For so many years, she had supported his service without fully understanding its impact beyond their immediate family. Now she could see that his dedication had touched lives in ways they had never imagined. "I'm proud of you," she said simply, "not just for being an excellent guardsman, but for becoming an even better man." That night, as James lay in bed looking at the framed handkerchief on his dresser, he thought about the unexpected journey that had begun with Queen Camilla's simple request for him to kneel. Breaking protocol that day had not diminished his service or compromised his values. It had deepened his understanding of what service truly meant. He had learned that strength could coexist with vulnerability, that professionalism could include humanity, and that the greatest honor was not in being invisible but in being truly seen. Queen Camilla had given him permission to be fully human while serving something greater than himself, and in doing so, she had transformed not just his career but his entire understanding of what it meant to serve with honor. As sleep began to claim him, James Mitchell, guardsman, husband, father, and human being, smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found the perfect balance between duty and humanity, between service and connection, between tradition and evolution.